Oh my gosh. Talking to you, Elizabeth, this is like something I'm getting kind of emotional. And as I was preparing to talk with you, the first baby born through IVF in the United States, thank you. Thank you for saying yes to me and being on this podcast.
My pleasure. Of course. I'm happy to
oh,
be here.
oh my gosh. You were born December 28th, 1981, Norfolk, Virginia.
Yes.
And you never could have planned all that has, I mean, your divine, how do I want to say this? You didn't ever plan to be kind of the advocate, the spokesperson that you are, what you represent in the IVF community.
Hold on. Sorry.
And we're back. This is real life. I mean, this is how your schedule, I'm sure, has been insane. Welcome to being here. And I'm so excited that you're making time for me. So thank you.
Of course, I'm thrilled to be here. I truly am. And yes, it has been madness.
Yeah, to say the least.
Yeah.
Your schedule, you've been sought after by news outlets, media stations. President Biden invites you to the State of the Union address. I mean, you're pretty popular these days, huh?
Yeah, it's a little bit strange because, I have been talking about these things my entire life. So on the one hand, I'm like, it's great that there's even more awareness now in a weird sort of way that all this had to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, I'm like, where have you all been
Yeah.
this whole time? So I
Yeah.
just, yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
There's a lot of attention brought on your birth and what you represent. And it's not something you ever asked for.
No, I always say that, the running joke in my family is that, when people meet me, they often say, thank you. And I'm like, honestly, I didn't do anything. I just showed up on time.
Mm,
And like, I hope that doesn't sound flip, but that's,
yeah. Divine timing.
yeah, that's kind of how it feels.
Because I'm sure you never, I mean, none of us know our divine destiny, what we're here to do, what we're called to do. And this unexpected gift and blessing, I'd love to hear in your words how you see this, your birth. And I'd like to also dive into your parents because I think they're remarkable. And
Yeah.
just a little bit about you. I mean, since 3 days old, being in the spotlight, your first quote press conference, right?
Yeah.
And Time Magazine. Not many people can say that as a baby, right?
Yes. Life magazine. Yes.
Oh, it was Life Magazine. My apologies.
Yeah.
Life. Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's always been, um, I joke that I am a founding member of a very exclusive club.
Yeah, you are.
Because that's truly how I feel. And now with
Yeah.
so many IVF babies on the planet, I always say like it makes me feel really old.
No.
But also, it's an incredible honor and one that I don't take lightly. And I think that is why I have spent my whole life being so vocal, because I do want people to just have an understanding of what the options are for your family building, whether or not you end up using any of the options. But I have always felt strongly like if my parents' OBGYN didn't happen to mention to them that he had just come back from this conference where it talked about this experimental thing called IVF,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be here because they never would have explored the option.
Yeah.
So that's kind of really my
I'm,
stake in the sand.
I'm so curious to learn. So your parents, I've done some research, Judy and Roger. They're trailblazers, really. I mean, for what they endured, and this was in the early 80s, right?
Yeah, I was born in 81.
And when did they start the process? Like, I understand your mom had a journey to come to the process of IVF,
Yeah,
some
so
ectopic pregnancy.
she did. She had 3 ectopic pregnancies.
Okay.
And so her problem was she could always get pregnant, but not stay pregnant. And
Mm.
her OBGYN actually finally figured out after her 3rd ectopic pregnancy, we're gonna take your tubes out because basically they ruptured so badly anyway.
Mm.
And her infertility was caused by scar tissue from a botched appendix surgery that was
Oh, wow.
impacting that whole area.
Oh,
So,
wow.
so she was young and healthy, aside from this issue with her fallopian tubes, really.
Yeah.
Um, so she was kind of a prime candidate for applying to this program in Virginia.
There was only one program at the time. Is that right?
Yes. So
That's so
um,
amazing.
IVF had been done successfully in England in
Mm-hmm.
78 with Louise Brown, a dear friend of mine.
Oh,
Um, but there were no programs up until the Jones started an experimental one at Eastern Virginia Medical School, and basically everywhere else in the country, including Massachusetts, where my parents were living, IVF was essentially illegal. And so they, took a chance and applied to this program and waited to see if they would be accepted. So,
and so the treatments back then, I mean, it was very experimental. Were there success rates of any kind? I mean, there's and in any regard of the fertilization process. And
so, so there were successes in other countries. So obviously
right.
England,
Yeah.
Australia. The thing to note about where I was born in Virginia is there were 41 attempts at this particular program, the Jones Institute, where I was born. 41 attempts had failed before my parents were successful.
Oh, 41
And
attempts. Wow. Okay.
and Dr. Georgiana, what distinguishes IVF in the US versus the first in the world, which was Louise Brown in the UK,
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Georgiana figured out that she could do this hormone protocol to stimulate the production of eggs. So basically, she is the founder of modern IVF because that's the same protocol everybody goes through now, right?
Oh, okay.
But Louise was a natural cycle. So they just kept pumping her mother full of her father's sperm until they got a successful pregnancy,
Wow.
essentially. Well, not her mother, but like, pumping the petri dish full of
Yeah.
sperm.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
and there was no, hormone stimulation, etc. So it's really interesting when you think about it that way.
Yeah. Until yours. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow. That's so fascinating. And growing up, what was that like? Being kind of in the spotlight, your parents in the spotlight, were they pretty open with you from the get-go about kind of your beginnings? I think I've heard you did there was a documentary about you and with was it around 6 or something that they were
That's when I watched it. So
Oh,
my parents were, when they were told they were going to be the first couple in the US to have an IVF baby,
yeah.
um, they were given the option to keep their name out of the press, and they didn't take it. And the reason they didn't take that out until, there was security around my birth, and they didn't release descriptions of what my parents looked like or things like that until after I was born.
Okay.
But my parents felt very strongly like, no, people need to know that this is an option, and they need to see that we're just like a normal couple, and this is a normal, healthy child. And so they chose very carefully which outlets they spoke to. They only wanted to do educational things,
Hmm.
but that was really important to them, to have that out there. And so when it was announced that she was pregnant, a Nova documentary crew from England contacted my parents and said, can we follow along? So they actually followed my mother's entire pregnancy, including they were in the delivery room when I was born. So that
Really?
was the
Wow.
documentary of my birth. I didn't
Okay.
watch it until I was about 6.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, you've known about reproduction from the get-go, huh?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. And it sounds like your parents really embraced, I mean, sharing this story and talking about giving hope to others through this process.
Yeah, I mean, that was really important to them, right? Like
Wow.
they basically were told by their doctor, well, we're taking your fallopian tubes, so this means you'll never have children of your own.
Mm.
Um, and so this was like this was their shot. And, everybody always is like, oh, did she go through one cycle or where is it? And it's like, guys, this was the 80s. Like there was no such thing as cycles. Like it
Oh,
was just like, we're going to retrieve some eggs and
yeah.
they only retrieved 2 eggs from my mother.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And they looked at one of them under the microscope and it wasn't really round. And they put the other one in. Like that's kind of like you have to
Like
think about how far we've
bare
come.
bones. Yeah. Wow.
Um, so,
This
and
one looks good. Like, let's just try this one.
right.
Wow.
And there was no insurance coverage at all because this was considered experimental. Top it
Uh,
off with they were flying back and forth to Virginia out of their own pocket. So like if this didn't work, that was it. Period.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was no outpatient then, right?
No, none of that.
I can only imagine the cost back then too, what this all cost.
Yeah. I mean, astronomical. Astronomical.
And don't you currently now, I mean, it's so interesting how your birth and what you've lived through working for a pre-implantation genetic testing company. Are you still currently doing that?
I am. So I'm the head of PR, marketing, and patient advocacy for a PT.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And I really want to talk about you too, because you're the soul of you. My podcast is Soulful IVF, right? Like, I really want to focus on you and who you are. Will you tell us a little bit about who is Elizabeth?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm a mom, a wife, a dog
Mhm.
mom. Um, I am a endurance runner. I run marathons. I'm a run coach on the side.
Oh,
I
cool.
do all this advocacy stuff. I do social media. Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm just, kind of like a boring,
No, you're not
boring
just.
everyday, 42-year-old. Like this is just part of my life.
Well, following you and learning about you and your spirit, and I've heard you talk about this, like the work you do and what you represent, it is bigger than infertility and fertility challenges, that you
Yes.
really care about, you know, running. If we talk about running the race, like being an advocate, living in our passion, speaking up for the things that matter to us. I just love to hear in your words a little bit about like what IVF means to you.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things when I was down in DC for the State of the Union, one of
Mm-hmm.
the things that I really wanted to stress while I was there is that when IVF was first invented, it was really for a tiny sliver of the population. And, my mom was a prime candidate because it was really designed exactly for her. The patient that had tubal damage or no tubes. And so they couldn't overcome that challenge in order to have a family.
Yeah.
Now, IVF is a tool for many, many people, many different segments of the population. If you're going through cancer treatments and you want to preserve your fertility, if you are same sex and you want to build a family, if you want to have genetic screening to screen out some of these really, truly terrible diseases that you want to reduce the risk of passing along. And so, that was really kind of my goal while I was there, was to educate about, this is no longer just like a tiny segment of the population. This really impacts a lot of people who are trying to build their family.
And what did you feel was the response or the vibe from your presence being there?
I mean, I think it depends
Washington.
on who I was talking to, obviously. um, but I think people just still, unfortunately, need to be educated on, the technology. A lot of people still don't know about the process of IVF.
Yeah, the basics. When they reached out to you for an interview and they're not familiar with certain terms, like what is an embryologist or even
Yes.
just what IVF is. And I've heard you give a really simple definition. If you'd like to share what it is in your words.
Yeah. So my doctor, when I was little, just explained to me that it was a sperm and an egg fertilized in a petri dish. And once fertilization happened, you're put back, those cells are put back in the in the womb, and 9 months later, you're born just like everybody else. So
Yeah,
it sounds
right.
pretty simple when you say it that way.
Yeah, it is simple. And it's gotten to be really complicated and kind of a taboo topic, right? What were you say?
I don't know that it's gotten to be. I think it has been. Um,
It has been, yes.
yeah, like there was a big ruckus when I was born. Obviously people thought this was playing God and this should not be allowed to proceed. Um, and so, in some ways that hasn't changed. There will always be those people that have those views.
Yeah.
Uh, the only thing that has changed is like the impact of, laws essentially coming down and
Yeah, let's talk about that.
I'm so
Oh my,
tired of.
you're tired of talking about it. We won't go over like the recap of everything, but you were on vacation. I was on vacation too, and I heard the news, and I can only imagine you weren't surprised from what I've heard in interviews. You weren't surprised of this ruling in Alabama. Um, but what other initial kind of thoughts came through or feelings? Like, oh, here's the beginning. Oh, here we go. Like,
Well, not even the beginning. I mean, that's the part I think a lot of people may not
mm,
recognize is like those of us in the advocacy world have been fighting
yeah,
um, personhood bills, language, etc. for quite a long time. I was comparing notes with my friends at Resolve, and we estimated for at least like 16 years. Believe
wow,
it or not. So like
wow,
it's just that this hadn't ever risen to the level where people were overly aware of it. If you were, in the advocacy network, you were aware of it,
yeah,
but it
yeah.
didn't rise to like mainstream media level attention. Um, so on the one hand, it was kind of like, oh, here we go again. Um,
Again, yeah.
and on the other hand, it was kind of like, okay, well, I hope people pay attention now.
And you really think from the fallout of Roe versus Wade, this is one of the
Yeah,
big
I mean,
things that kind of, yeah.
the language was put in the Alabama Constitution to protect the sanctity of life, including unborn children, and to use their words. And so that was put in, I think, in 2018. And so when the Dobbs decision overruled Roe v. Wade, that kind of really triggered this language to be recognized
Mm,
and upheld as, law, essentially. So it was a incremental build to get to where we had this ruling really stop IVF in Alabama.
And IVF was stopped for like 2 weeks, all of the treatments. It is now resumed. However, can
Yeah.
you foreshadow or see? I don't know. There's like kind of a band-aid right now, right?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't get at the ultimate crux of this question of what do we do with the embryos and at which point does life begin? Like those questions,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
unfortunately, we haven't ever agreed on the answers to those questions in 42 years. So I'm not optimistic that we will come to an agreement quickly.
Yeah.
So there's definitely more work to do, but on the other
Mhm.
hand, I mean, I think that's the one silver lining, right? Is that people are paying attention now and talking about these issues and how they do impact, more than just a teeny tiny segment of the population.
Yeah. Being a guest of Senator Tim Kaine from Virginia, you're at the White House and being a part of that experience. What was that like? I mean,
It was incredible. It was totally surreal. Um, I mean, I can't even describe it really.
Mhm.
It was a once in a lifetime moment. And it really gave me a little bit of reassurance when IVF was mentioned in the opening paragraphs of
Yeah.
President.
Yeah. Wasn't that amazing?
Yeah, definitely didn't see that coming.
Reproductive
I
rights.
knew he would probably do a nod to IVF or whatever, but I didn't anticipate it being so early. Which
Yeah.
was really, shows that it is important.
In the opening paragraph.
Mhm. Yeah,
And so
literally.
your presence there, from your perspective, did you feel well received by most? Like, I'm just curious, like,
Yeah, I mean, I got so many hugs from senators and senators taking selfies with me and giving me hugs. Like I did not have one single bad interaction while I was there. Which I think just goes to show like
yeah,
if there's any level of education, and I think it takes away that fear
yeah.
that that opposition that people might have is like fearful. Yeah.
Can we talk about that just for a little bit? Like, what do you think is the fear? Where is this coming from?
I think
What is
people truly just don't understand the technology.
okay.
And it sounds very sci-fi, unless you really take a minute to understand what it means.
I was talking to my husband last night about this conversation I was going to have with you. And he's like, there's just these polarizing sides, right? I mean, we had one embryo, one opportunity. It's our daughter. Like, we are so over the moon, blessed and grateful. Like, she is a true miracle, like, started in the petri dish, right? We have the pictures of the cluster of cells. I mean, we needed IVF because of male factor and different challenges, right? Without this technology, who knows? I'm so grateful. He's like, I want to shout it from the rooftops, like, I'm an IVF dad, and like, but there's a lot of people that there's shame, there's fear, it's like a hidden taboo kind of thing where more people are talking about it. Thankfully, with everything in the media, people are talking about this, but it's like the fear, like, yeah, people just don't understand. They don't know. I mean,
Yeah, exactly. And that's the piece, right? That's the piece that I think is so important to me, that
yeah.
I help educate people, because then um it opens up those conversations.
What do you love most about the kind of advocacy work that you do? Are you traveling a lot? Are you speaking? I know you're involved in Resolve, National Fertility Organization. Like,
Yeah, I've been a state
what?
captain for a couple years for Advocacy Day for Resolve. So that's always a
Oh yeah.
wonderful pet project of mine. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
but also, a lot of the advocacy is just stuff that people don't see, um, which could consist of, answering questions for people. I get questions all day long, all
Oh
day
my,
and night.
I can
Really.
only imagine. Like, you live and breathe this, right? Oh
Yeah,
my
pretty much.
gosh.
Um, So I think that's probably my favorite part, is just, I do not take it lightly when people share their personal journeys and stories with me. Like I
Yeah.
know how
Yeah.
personal it is to share that with somebody. And so, it's just very humbling.
Yeah.
Um, because I myself didn't go through fertility treatments. I had my son the old-fashioned way, right?
Yeah.
So I, in one way, do not know what people are going through, and in another way, I do, um, to a different degree. So,
Yeah.
it's kind of this interesting position to really understand that, like, I am the outcome that everybody is hoping for.
You're right.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing, just and thinking back with what your parents went through, there was no support. There were
None.
no groups. There were no, the mindset that your parents must have carried, the type of resiliency, courage, determination to go through what they went through at that time without any support. Like, I just really honor and see that. I can't even imagine back then.
Yeah, I mean, my mother always says that, like, she could always find a baby book on like death and taxes, but she could never find a book to explain, how I got here.
Oh,
Uh, which is always kind of an interesting thing for me to think about.
were they pretty open with you and talking? I mean, sharing their journey to reach you when you were young? Were these
Yeah,
open
I mean,
conversations like
they
all the
didn't
time?
really have a choice, if we're being honest. Like, I mean, I was listening to them do interviews from like as long as I can remember. So I think that that's like, that's the piece that I've always understood, their struggle and their journey to have a family.
Did they get to meet your son?
Oh yeah. My dad just recently passed away like a couple years ago. Um
Oh,
but my son is 13, so
oh,
he's had a lot of time with his
wow.
grandparents. Pretty cool.
Wow. I'm curious what his perspective is through your story. And does he share anything about that? I'm sure he has insights from traveling and like, wow, my mom's this. And I don't know. He's spreading the word about
Yeah,
IVF at a young age.
it's a little funny. Because I wrote a book when well, I didn't write a book on purpose. Let me put it that way. When when I was turning 40, which was a couple years ago,
Yeah.
I just was kind of like reflecting on, oh, it's been 40 years.
Yeah.
And even though my son has always had an awareness of like mommy's this weird kind of famous in that
Oh,
like I can go to the grocery store and people don't know who I am. But if I go to a fertility conference, I'm like Mick Jagger, right?
yeah.
It's like this weird thing.
Yeah.
So he's always understood like I was an IVF baby and I was the
Mhm.
first and like whatever, but he never, had heard my side of the story. He just kind of always understood like, oh, this is how she got here. And like
Mhm.
Grandma and Grampy went through whatever to have her.
Aw.
So I set out to write a, a, a book of sorts for him to explain like, hey, this is everything I've been through in my life, and here's why it's important and it matters. And, it's not always sunshine, rainbows, and puppy dogs. And like, quite frankly, sometimes, especially when I was a teen, I just wanted to like be like everybody else and not have
Mm.
cameras around and not have somebody following me to my homecoming dance, which was like my first
Really?
date. And,
Really? Oh, oh my
um,
God.
so I wrote him this book and I sent it to a friend of mine because I was a journalist for many years.
Yeah.
And I was joking with her like, even though this is just for my son, I still need like a proofreader and an editor and could
Mm.
give this a read. And she was like, "Well, you should really just get this published. And you can make it for your son too, but like people need to hear this."
Mm.
Um, so that was a bigger way of my explaining to him, this whole industry world, why I work so hard and do this. And it was really important to me that he understood that.
Is that the Life Under the Microscope book?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. Awesome. Oh, yeah. There's something about turning 40, right? I'm a few years older than you, but I had my daughter at 40 and wrote a book too about our journey and our story and this whole process. It's a wild ride. I mean, I know you haven't lived the process of IVF, but you're the product of it. And it's just remarkable and how grateful for this technology, this science, and it's led not only to my incredible daughter, but like a purpose and a passion that I never expected to be stepping into this work as a coach and helping
Right.
others navigate this ride.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's an incredible honor, right? It's like one that it's hard to explain to other
Yeah, it
people.
is. It really is. It really is.
Yeah.
Um, but thank goodness for this science that helps so many grow families. I wish more legislators understood that we are helping build and grow families. you
Yes.
know, I'm
Yes.
sure you get fired up too when I heard some of the
It,
senators of like, are you
definitely.
freaking kidding me?
Yeah.
In
Um,
Alabama saying like, we're just trying to help build families. We're trying to help them grow. And I'm like, well, you're doing the exact opposite.
right. Yeah. I mean, that's the part, like, that's where I'm like, okay, let's sit down and have a real conversation.
Did you
So,
get to meet with him?
no,
Oh, God.
no,
Wow. Yeah, I'm sure he wasn't open to that conversation, was he?
I didn't see him, but
The furthest thing from it. Um, for all of us in this community, what kind of advice, guidance, encouragement can you offer those who are on this path? And whether you're in the journey of IVF, whether it's worked for you and you have a story to share, or, there's all different levels of where people are at, how open they are or not. But I just feel there's there's a new energy rising of people wanting to speak up and share. What kind of like guidance can you give us?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not gonna lie, it is tough to share not only your story, but even if you aren't on a family building journey, but you want people to know about the technologies that are out there,
Mhm.
it can feel a little overwhelming to be seen as like the educator, in your social circle.
Yeah.
So my biggest advice is always, find your village, find the other people that can help you do that. Find the resources that can take some of that heavy lift off of you. Especially if it's like a close friend or family member or something. Like, you do not have to feel responsible to fully educate somebody.
Mm.
You can lay the groundwork and you can point them in the right direction, but ultimately, like, they need to take that step in order to read the thing or,
Mhm.
whatever. Um, because it can get heavy. It can get
Yeah.
very heavy. And especially like in the last, for me as a personal example, in the last few weeks, obviously, I've been talking to reporter after reporter after reporter, and I was a journalist. That
Yeah.
that was my job, to talk to people and write
Yeah.
these stories. And
Yeah.
so I try to do it in a polite way, but I'm pretty blunt when somebody hasn't done their homework.
Yeah.
And I will say right at the top of a conversation, before they even can ask me any questions, give me your understanding of, in my case, I'm an IVF person. Give me your understanding of IVF.
Mm-hmm.
And that way I can have a sense of where their gaps are, where their inaccuracies are, and I can just address those, as opposed to feeling like I have to do the wholesale, like, soup to nuts, this is what IVF is.
Yeah.
Um, and so you can say that. You can say, well, tell me what you understand about these family building options.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that takes a little bit of the pressure off of the situation too.
Yeah.
And then you can also follow it up with, okay, now let me point you in the direction of some really great resources, or where you can learn more about, XYZ.
What are the resources that you love most?
Resolve is always at the top of my list.
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
because they've actually been around since before I was born. Um, and they're just phenomenal.
Yeah.
And the other two that I think are critical are ASRM, the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, which is like the industry, um, educator, I will call
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
And then Doctors for Fertility
Mhm.
is also really high up there. Those are my top three. Um,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
there's a lot of like other, patient organizations for if you're, on a specific path, like men having babies, if you're a same-sex, male couple that wants to have a family, or
Mhm.
Help Cure HD if you're dealing with Huntington's disease in your family and you want to do genetic screening to reduce the risk of passing it along. Like, there are so many organizations out there. You just have to
Mhm.
know, you know, that you don't have to go so broad that, it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be that overwhelming.
And just within our own states, reaching out to our representatives and sharing our story, especially Advocacy Day coming up. And April being our Infertility Awareness Month. So
Yes.
we'll be wearing our orange and share a little bit about that. Why do we wear orange? Do you know why?
Yeah, I mean, it's just the color of infertility awareness.
Yeah.
So I don't know if people may not have noticed, but during the State of the Union, a lot of us, me included, were
Yes.
wearing our little orange ribbons.
Ribbon. Yes. And
So
Senator King did that too. That was really cool.
yeah, yep,
Um, oh my gosh. Well, just telling our stories, using our voices, leaning on one another. I mean, this is what it's about. It takes all of us, strength in numbers.
yes, exactly.
Any kind of final lasting words of you'd like to leave us with, the importance of this and why it matters to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think just it's just important for people to realize that, you're not alone. I mean, that's the biggest thing, right? You're not on this journey by yourself. And the reason I'm so busy is because people do reach out to me. But if you do reach out to me, I will respond. It won't
Yeah.
necessarily be super fast, but
Yeah.
it's me. Like, I really want to help people
Yeah.
in whatever way I can. So if I don't know the answer to something, I will find someone who does or can help you find the answer to
Yeah.
something. And you need to have more people like that in your corner. I think that's the biggest
Yeah.
thing. It's just, don't be afraid to reach out. There are no stupid questions.
I'm just so grateful it's you. Like you are the representation. And seriously though, like you're so down to earth. You're so real. Just I can't even imagine someone else being in your shoes. Like
Oh, thank you.
really, truly. Like I don't know you personally, but I feel like you're like a girlfriend I just want to hang out with. And you're so relatable and real. So thank you for doing what you do. I mean, all of us here, we're so grateful for the work that you take on, using your voice, being this spirit, this representation. I talk about living in the light on this podcast, being a bright light. Like you truly are a bright light in this space.
That means a lot to me. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm gonna tear up. I'm like thinking about just everything about this right now in this moment. I'm so soaking it up. It's not every day that you get to talk to someone like you. So thank you.
Of
So
course.
grateful. And
Yeah.
oh, do you have any final like website or ways for people to connect with you? I'll include things in the show notes below.
Yeah. So easiest way is
Mhm.
Instagram, which is my handle eJordan12. And then if you want to send me a longer note, you can go on my website, which is ejordancarr.com. And you won't get a robot. I check my own email, so you'll actually get me.
Yes.
Um, so yeah,
Yeah.
those are the ways to, reach out to me.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. You're a gem. Love you.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.